This simple, chill game I'm enjoying right now is called Westerado. The title is probably a play on the Old West and the famous 80s wide open Western film featuring a really young Kevin Costner called Silverado. The game in look, music, and play is totally paying homage to the spaghetti Western genre from the 60s and 70s. This game came out in 2015, a full 50 years after the summit reaching film of the spaghetti Western style was being shown on the big screen. That then 50-year-old movie was none other than The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, arguably the GOAT of the genre. Just as impressive, if not even a little more, is that dozens of really good games have been created in the millennium that pay tribute to the famous Italian horror and slasher genre from the same period of the 1960s and 70s. In fact, the recent release of the Quarry game is widely popular and largely draws from the Giallo film style by incorporating psychological horror and widely utilized camera angles in its cinematography. The Quarry was released 60 years after the first well known Giallo film was featured, called The Girl Who Knew Too Much. That's right, 60 years ago. These two headshots are of Sergio Leone and Ennio Morricone, the two giants of the spaghetti western genre. Leone directed only 7 films in his career. 4 of them are uncontested, true masterpieces. From 1963 on through the end of that decade, Leone made these incredible films: A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Once Upon a Time in the West. The first 3 are referred to as the Dollars Trilogy. These films not only featured big stars of the day, but the films themselves experimented with new concepts in cinematography, music, blocking, costuming, set designs, sound, humor, and acting styles. Essentially, every sensory effect was considered in determining the finished product. Leone, through his genius, was able to direct all of these seminal films as well as apply his producer and screenwriting talents when and where needed in the productions. Ennio Morricone composed the scores in all of these mentioned films. The hammering rhythms, explosive percussion, and powerful but also tender brass section were in frequent play, with all of this musical power in effect to deliver musical punches to the listener. Morricone had a genius ability to highlight and blend his strings in a subtle way or in an anxiety inducing manner when not employing them as the dominant musical section, forcibly moving the musical delivery forward. Many of the themes would begin with a short series of notes serving as the motive. Often, they would only be around just 6 notes that would be developed and recapitulated with complex false crescendo, and then repeated again to achieve the true crescendo of the piece. This colorful, exciting, explosive, yet tender new style of Western musical score would become the standard that time has shown was rarely ever matched again by other composers since Morricone. Sergio Leone and Ennio Morricone worked very well together and respected each other's input and insights. As a result, the viewer to any of the maestro's collaborations is treated to a master class of visual and auditory delight. As the 1960s turned into the 70s, the spaghetti western genre began its decline due to oversaturation, lesser quality productions, outlandish premises, and overall lower popularity. Many of the over 600 movies created in this genre were produced during this time period. Towards the end, the genre experimented in ridiculous and outlandish ways, enabling present day author John LeMay to categorize these films by his spaghetti glossary, consisting of 1. The true spaghetti western, a western produced for the Italian film industry, often shot in Spain. 2. Beans western, a spaghetti western with a comedic slant. 3. Acid western, a western that is psychedelic or far out. 4. Chop suey western, a western that integrates kung fu martial arts and Asian actors. And 5. Twilight western, a western featuring vampires, but also referring to Italian westerns shot from the 1970s on. In 1929, a pulp murder mystery and crime thriller novel was published in Italy. The cheaply made paperback had a bright yellow cover called Giallo in Italian, with an action picture in the center of the yellow cover. The publisher was called Giallo Mondadori. This publication idea proved so popular that these type novels proliferated through the decades and exist in variant forms even today. By the early 1960s, the Giallo concept was brought to the big screen by a few innovative and creative practitioners. The leader of the pack was the incomparable Italian filmmaker Mario Bava. He directed 24 films in his career, including 1963's The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which is widely considered the earliest entrant into the Giallo genre. Although Bava himself did not consider this film with fondness at all, it still proved very valuable in applying several conventions which would soon become standard to many future entrants in the newly created Giallo genre. These initial conventions included a complicated plot, red herrings, lurking creepy shadows, and sinister happenings. Additional commonalities to the new genre would be added in a follow-up film, Blood and Black Lace, in 1964. Some of these conventions were extreme violence, garish colors, claustrophobic paranoia, sexploitation, psycho thriller, and the black fedora hat, trench coat, white mask, and leather gloves. Another major convention was firmly implanted into the Giallo genre with such tenacity that it created a subgenre on its own merit. This references, of course, to the new slasher film concept, which was formally presented in Bava's 1971 film, A Bay of Blood. Mario Bava has been labeled a genius by many for his contributions in Italian Gothic horror, direction, and being a true keystone in the creation of the Giallo films and slasher movies. As a result, he has gone on to inspire generations of filmmakers. When asked directly about his genius, he responded, "I don't want to be a director, because in my opinion, a director must be a true genius." The British Film Institute says Bava took a vital role in the creation of the modern horror film. We acknowledge him on the same level as Hitchcock in pioneering big screen chills and thrills. Italian director Dario Argento is famously known as the master of the thrill. He has stated that horror is like a serpent always shedding its skin, always changing. You must push everything to the absolute limit, or else life will be boring. Without psychology, the horror film doesn't exist. Argento came to the Giallo or spaghetti Giallo genre, as many Americans referred to it at that time, with an abundance of skills and abilities that included acting, screenwriting, producing, critiquing, and eventually directing. For many fans and critics, Argento's film The Bird with the Crystal Plumage from 1970 is considered his capolavoro, or masterpiece, being that this film was Argento's directorial debut at the age of 29. He became a European sensation as well known in the United States. Argento utilized many of the features that Bava introduced to the genre, but at the same time, he developed many of them further, with even better effect that contributed even more to the thrill and chills of his works. He went on to direct 18 films, which included the famous animal trilogy The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1970, The Cat O' Nine Tails, 1971, and Four Flies on Grey Velvet, 1971. Argento's work went on to influence American filmmakers like John Carpenter as he made 1978's Halloween, as well as Brian De Palma in his 1980 release of Dressed to Kill. The latter has proved to be an entrant by the United States into the Giallo genre from a world perspective. Spaghetti westerns and giallo horror thrillers as film genres have been in hibernation for decades. Occasionally, creatives like Quentin Tarantino, Jan Gonzalez, and others experiment with the genre's conventions in their current film projects with usually good results and sometimes great success. No other medium, though, has picked up and embraced the two Italian based genres over the last 20 years more than video games, especially the Western and horror survival RPG segments. So, why is that the case? Because they are powerful means of escapism that allows one to experience danger in a controlled environment while at the same time subconsciously overcoming fear. People like getting scared, even if they don't like it in the moment. The rush and thrill of a scary moment can raise emotions that both scares and excites. Psychology describes the excitation transfer theory as the belief that aggressive responses to one thing will lead to a stimulus of another emotion without us being aware it's happening. This can happen during a jump scare or a suspenseful buildup, and this feeling can be so strong that it makes us want to keep doing more of what scares us, be it a haunted maze, scary movie, or in this case, a survivor horror game. Here is a listing of GameRamp's top 10 best Giallo inspired games on Steam from the last 2 decades. Number 10, BioShock Infinity, for its twisted turns and terrifying moments. Number 9, Deadly Premonition, for its mind blowing revelations. Number 8, BioShock Infinity, Burial at Sea, for its eerie environments. Number 7, Condemned, Criminal Origins, for its cat and mouse style. Number 6, Until Dawn, for its horror, mystery, and investigation elements. Number 5, Observer, for its psychological horror and claustrophobic gameplay. Number 4, The Evil Within series, for its great giallo horror title and extreme violence in eerie environments. Number 3, Silent Hill series, its first 5 games. Number 2, Alan Wake, for its psychological thriller moments and mysterious disappearances. And number 1, The Quarry, for its twists and turns, camera angles, psychological horror, and cinematography. Some popular games representing the spaghetti western specific style over the last 15 years include Red Dead Redemption 2, Westerado Double Barreled, open world top down shooter. Avenge the murder of your aunt and big brother by seeking out, finding, and killing the villain in grand style. Secret Ponchos, a highly competitive PvP fighting game. Kill or be killed. And Smoking Guns, a multiplayer FPS first person shooter. The last two games are quintessential. If you're going to shoot, shoot, don't talk type games. Red Dead Redemption 2 is widely considered one of the best video games ever made, and it pays homage to certain spaghetti western themes in its gameplay. One such example are the bleak snowy landscapes of the early missions, calling back to Sergio Corbucci's 1968 movie, The Great Silence, where the cold, unforgiving environments highlight its cold, unforgiving characters. As you pass the hours playing this wonderful game, you can't help but think that it is truly deserving of an Ennio Morricone score to support it. All signs point to the video game industry, from AAA on down to the small indie developer, that interest remains high in development incorporating conventions from these Italian genres will continue in many games to come. During the 1960s and 70s, Italy enjoyed a mini renaissance with incredibly talented filmmakers, musical composers, inspirational authors, colorful artists, innovative fashion and set designers who were located relatively close by to each other, centered mostly in around Rome. This boon of talent in close proximity allowed for constant collaboration and shared vision. The two genres were hardly siloed from each other. In fact, many artists worked in both genres simultaneously. In fact, Dario Argento, the great Giallo film director, wrote the screenplay for Sergio Leone's 1968 masterpiece, Once Upon a Time in the West. Likewise, Ennio Morricone wrote scores for several Giallo horror films in addition to the classic spaghetti westerns mentioned earlier. Case in point was Dario Argento's landmark animal trilogy films, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, The Cat o' Nine Tails, and Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Morricone wrote the scores for all three of those films. So, how did these two genres compare in style, conventions, and delivery? They actually shared more commonalities than you may think. Some of the similarities were they both utilized music so much throughout that the overall score was essentially another key actor in the film. They both employ extreme violence, often through stylized murders using juxtaposing extreme close ups. They both incorporate colors mixed with emotions in many scenes. They both develop epic stories within stories and involved themes. They both used enigmatic film titles. They both featured outrageous villains. They both display unexpected humanity at poignant times. They both use similar camera shots and set designs to heighten suspense and edginess. They both featured incredible music that promoted and heightened excitement, suspense, anxiety, sadness, and at times, humor. Now, let's break down the last three commonalities. Humanity often took a back seat in many of the spaghetti westerns and giallo thrillers. However, it did raise its head up at times in well placed parts of particular scenes. Here we see our anti hero, the man with no name, pause for a couple of minutes and share his cigar stub with a dying Confederate soldier. No words are needed here, as everything necessary to know and understand and feel is conveyed through the character's eye contact, aided by the tender and sad music pouring over the scene. Use of camera angles, spinning shots, panoramic lengthy long shots, and extreme close ups were used to achieve heightened excitement and suspense. This was achieved by focusing in on body, hand, and eye movements in a juxtaposing manner, with music rising in intensity at a regulated rate, rising to a false crescendo and then rebuilding from the beginning and working its thematic score up to achieve a thundering beat and rhythm, leading to the true crescendo at the moment of action. This explanation is filmed brilliantly in the final duel between the three principal characters known as the trio in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The music, which supports the action, lasts for 4 minutes and 28 seconds. There is not a word spoken in the sequence, as there is no need for a single word. The heightened camera work, utilizing cut shots and extreme close ups on the character's eyes, coupled with the heightening music trading off from strings to brass to percussion, makes the complete process integral to the meaning of the entire film and to, subsequently, the entire genre. How were these two genres different, aside from the fact that one was a Western theme and the other a horror thriller vehicle? Some differences between the genres. Spaghetti westerns tended to be loud and noisy in many of their scenes and places. Whether it was in character speech or outdoor sounds like wagons, horses, etc., the common thread was noise. The loudest sound was naturally the gunfire. Pistols, rifles, Gatling guns, and cannons were amped up on purpose to be much louder than in real life. It was a part of the mystique of the genre. Giallo films would at times be loud as well, but the more common approach was a style of creepy, atmospheric sounds and music. Main characters in the Western genre wore a series of dusters and ponchos and sometimes well made black suits of the day with fancy cowboy boots, usually with spurs, and well defined cowboy hats of various quality. The Giallo film villains would wear trench coats, black fedora hats, white masks at times, and oh yeah, black leather gloves. Giallo plots were often complex and involved themselves with psychological crime, sexploitation, and sleazy glamour, delivered through extreme violence and suspense. The Italian Western's typical plot would be simpler and more direct, usually involving revenge, payback, and riches, or a combination of the three. Usually, the antihero achieves some form of personal gain after getting beat up or tortured. Filming styles and methods share more in common with the two genres than not. The one exception is the extended long shot that was used much more in the Italian westerns than in the giallo horror thriller films. This was done to convey a wide open Wild West full of adventure and danger. The funny thing is that many of the shots were made in Spain, mostly, far away from the American West. Giallo films would sometimes feature an amateur sleuth who would often fumble and stumble through the film, hoping to solve the crimes. The Western films almost always featured a so called protagonist who was often clear headed, experienced, if not grizzled, and totally prepared to face the bad guys. Another difference between the two genres manifested itself in the early 1970s. Giallo films evolved from 1963 to 1976, but the evolution for the most part was measured and still contained within the conventions of the genre. By the early mid 1970s, the spaghetti western genre went off the rails. Experimentation ran amok. Films were being made that featured martial artists, vampires, druggies, and comedians. That is why a majority of the 600 films made during this period were really bad. Last up, body count. The Italian Western glorified violent kills by any means. A film would have anywhere from as low as around 10 on up to as many as 75 or more kills. The average film had a kill rate in the 30s. Compared to a typical Giallo horror film, it was far higher. Even an extremely violent slasher film wouldn't attain close to those numbers. It is clear that the spirit of the two Italian genres are alive and well today, a full 60 years after their creation through the medium of video games. Spaghetti westerns have given us wide open vistas, brutal and unforgiving plot structures, strong-willed, uncompromising anti-heroes and villains, and stylized camera work and cinematography, all the while being treated to sound and musical audio that is basically unmatched in all of film history. Giallo horror thriller films have psychologically messed with our minds and jump scared us near to death for decades. These chills and thrills are always desired and in big demand for every audience. As Brian Cassaday put it, the Giallo is far from dead. It may fade in popularity for a while, but like a zombie, it continues to return to life and thrill audiences. For these reasons and others, video games reach out for these strange, edgy, creepy, and exciting themes as constant plot points that direct gameplay in so many top games that are being played today, and will no doubt be just as popular for years to come. And that is it. I thank you for watching my video.